Hey everyone, welcome to my channel or welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in the month of February. Okay, so I've got my stats here. In the month of February, I read 9 books, which is 2 more than I read last February. So I'm feeling pretty good about my reading goals for this year. Those 9 books makes a total of 3,078 pages, which is about 110 pages read per day. I read 8 female authors and 1 male author. I had 2 5-star reads, 3 4-star reads, 2 3.5-star reads, 1 3-star read, and 1 2.5-star read. So overall, I had a pretty okay reading month. I did have 2 5-stars and 3 4-stars, which is really good, but I usually don't rate books lower than 3 stars. But other than that, it was not too shabby. The first book I read this month was Finlay Donovan Knocks I'm Dead. This is the second book in the Finlay Donovan is Killing It series. This book was not as good as the first one, I will say, but I still really enjoyed this one. I'm not going to talk too much about what it's about because it is the second in the series and picks up right where it left off in the first, but I did give this book 4 stars. Next, I read Ties That Tether by Jayden. I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. I wish I read this sooner. This book was so cute. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed learning about a Nigerian woman and the way that her culture works with her family, and I just really wish that I read this sooner. But this book follows a Nigerian woman who lives in Toronto, and she's doing pretty well with her job. She keeps moving up, but I'm pretty sure she's like 30 or something. So her mom is getting on her about settling down and starting a family, because in the Nigerian culture that's very common for women to get married and have babies pretty early on in their adult life. So her mom sets her up on dates with people, and she was at a hotel restaurant, I believe, when her date was not going well. So she left and went to the bar in the restaurant in the hotel, or a different bar in the hotel, something along those lines. Sorry, it's been a minute since I read this. And she runs into this very attractive white man. He's Spanish because his family's from Spain, but technically he's white skin color wise. His name is Raphael. She ends up having a drink with this man that she meets at the bar, and they go back to his hotel room because he is in a hotel because he is in Toronto for a job interview. They end up having a one-night stand, but the next day she goes to work, or like a couple days later, because I believe it was a Friday or something. She goes to work, and the man that was here for the interview that she slept with now works at the company that she works for. And it's just a really good book, really fast read, and I just really enjoyed it a lot, and I definitely plan on reading her other book as well. So I gave this one 5 stars. Next, I read and actually finished this time Razorblade Tears. If you watched my December wrap-up, you saw that I DNF'd this book. I just couldn't get into it. The writing was just so gross and juvenile to me. I just wasn't vibing with it. But every book that I DNF, I give a second chance, so I decided I would try this one again. I did finish it. I still very much thought the writing was juvenile and gross. I gave it 3.5 stars because the plot was good, like the plot twists and all that, but it was just the writing. I knocked it down a lot of points because of the writing, so 3.5 stars. Next, I read Two Can Keep a Secret by Karen M. McManus. I have now officially read all of her books, and I did do a ranking and reviewing Karen M. McManus books. I will link that. But I gave this one 3.5 stars. It was hard to follow, like I mentioned in that video. It was hard to follow. There was a lot of people that I had to remember how they were related to each other or how they correlated with the other people in the story, and I just don't care for stories like that. If I have to write down characters and like make a family tree, so to speak, then I'm not really interested in it, and this book I was having to do that, and so because of that I gave it 3.5 stars. But this book follows a set of twins, Ezra and Ellery. I like the name Ellery, I've never heard it before. Their mom's kind of not all there, so they go to stay with their grandmother, and they're in their senior year of high school, and they're going to a whole new school. So because of that, people at the school are interested in wondering why they transferred, and so they kind of have to talk about that with with their friends that they meet is that their mom is kind of not all there. She's in rehab, and they live in a small town. Their grandmother lives in a small town, and there's a lot of crime in this small town. So to start the crime, so to speak, in this small town is when their aunt was 17, she had gone missing and was never found. And then the day that they get to the town, there is a man that is lying dead on the side of the road because he was hit by a car and the car drove off. So that's like the first thing they see when they get there. And then a little while later, a girl that Ellery has acquainted herself with goes missing. And so they try to figure out why she's gone missing, who took her, and then if it correlates to the person that was ran over by a car. And then Ellery and Ezra are very interested in finding out if these two things that have happened since they've lived there are linked to their missing aunt. It's got a lot of plots and it's really good, but it's just hard to follow with those characters. So because of that, I gave it 3.5 stars. Next, I read The Burning Girls by C.J. Tudor. This book was actually pretty good. I wasn't expecting to like it as much as I did. This book reminds me a lot of The Whisper Man by Alex North. If you've read that, it kind of gives me vibes. It's not the same like storyline or plot at all, but just like where the story takes place, how the story is told, all that reminds me of The Whisper Man by Alex North. So I feel like if you like that book, then you'll enjoy this one. But this book follows a woman who is a pastor or a priest. They call her a vicar, which I'm pretty sure is like the same thing as like a priest or a pastor. Anywhoosies, this takes place in the UK, I believe. But she is a single mom and she lives with her 14-year-old daughter. And I can't really exactly remember everything that happened, but there's like a lot of weird stuff that happens in this town. There's people who are kind of weird and flaky, like when you ask them things. If you ask them specific questions, they don't want to answer, so they get all weird and then they kind of just like flake out. But The Burning Girls comes from the fact that 500 years prior to Jack and her daughter Flo, there were girls that were burned, and they say that they still haunt like the cemetery, the church area, the town, and people can see them on fire. And then 30 years prior to Jack and Flo moving in, 2 girls had gone missing, and it's believed to be said that the previous vicar before Jack killed himself, and it was said that he was researching and something weird happened, and it's just a really good book. I enjoyed it a lot. I gave it 4 stars. Next, I read The Kiss Quotient by Helen Wong. This book was so cute. I wish I read this sooner. This wasn't like any romance that I've ever read before, which I liked because sometimes enemies to lovers and friends to lovers can get annoying. This was completely different. So this is about a woman who has autism. She's on the Asperger spectrum, I guess is how you call it, or she's on the autism spectrum because she has Asperger's syndrome, I think is the more appropriate way to say it. Anyways, she is, I can't remember exactly how old she is. She's 30 and she's doing really well in her job. She's kind of stuck. Like, she would like to start a family, but she's just awkward and doesn't know how to have sex, doesn't like making out. So she hires an escort to teach her how to be more comfortable with making out and to have sex. Well, because it's a romance, this is not a spoiler, but they end up falling in love. And I just really appreciated the story. I liked that the main character had autism. I haven't read a story involving a main character who had any sort of disease or illness or was autistic. So because of that, I really enjoyed this book. I plan on reading, if you watched my TBR for March, I plan on reading the second book in the series. I did order it in my book of the month. I added it on, so I'm really excited about that. But I really enjoyed this book. I gave this one 5 stars. Next, I read Greenwich Park by Catherine Faulkner. This is a debut novel, and it wasn't terrible, but I can't really review this book without spoiling anything. So I'm not going to say too much about it, but I am going to say that it was boring. I didn't care for the writing, and that's all I can really say because I didn't care for the writing, because one of of the women is pregnant. So this follows, the main character is pregnant, and then she goes to prenatal classes and she meets another pregnant woman. But this pregnant woman smokes and drinks, and just the way that the author, I don't know if like the author actually believes this to be true, but the way that the author wrote the story made it seem like 1 glass of wine a day is okay when you're pregnant, and smoking cigarettes isn't going to harm the baby, and it's been proven that 1 glass of wine, whether it's red or white, is not good while you're pregnant, and smoking cigarettes is definitely not okay while pregnant. And so I don't know how the author actually felt about that, because the way that she was writing made me believe that she believed it. I don't know, it's kind of weird to explain, but I don't want to go into too much detail about this book, but I gave it 2.5 stars. Not a good book. Did not care for it. Next, I read Shadows of Pecan Hollow. This is a historical fiction, and I absolutely loved it. It was so good. Kept me hooked. This was the biggest book I read this month, of 402 pages, and I read it fairly quickly. This book follows a woman who, well, it starts out when she's 13, and she's been in the foster care program, and she doesn't care for it, so she runs away. So she's considered a runaway. And the last family she was with, they wanted to adopt her, and she didn't want to be adopted, so she fled to go to her aunt's house. And is it her aunt? It's some family member. I think it's her great aunt, because the lady's like 70. So it's gotta be her great aunt, because it's not her grandmother. Anyways, she doesn't have any money. She's 13, so she doesn't have a driver's license. So she goes to a gas station or some place and tries to steal from a man, and he notices and catches her. And this man's name is Manny, and he's kind of crazy, just very careless about everything except himself. That's the only person he cares about. He's very selfish, and he decides to take in this 13-year-old girl. Her name is Kit, and she and him, they don't do anything sexual, but he definitely grooms her, and she stays with him until she's 19, and they make a team where they rob people. She drives the getaway car. When she turns 15, this is when they start doing all that. She drives the getaway car while he holds people at gunpoint and robs them. And by the time she's 19, well, when she turns 18, he's like, okay, you're of legal age now. Now you can be my girlfriend or whatever. So they have sex, and she ends up getting pregnant. And he doesn't want the baby, and she does. He forces her to go to an abortion clinic. And he pretty much will not leave the room. So all that happens when she's 19, and then she decides she's had enough. So she steals his car. And then fast forwards to when she's about 30, and he gets out of prison and finds her. And it's just a whole story. It kind of reminded me of The Great Alone, even though it was not even remotely close, because The Great Alone takes place in Alaska and Washington, and this takes place in Texas. Regardless, it was a very good book. I really enjoyed it. I posted my review on my Instagram, my book Instagram page, and the author commented on it, and I thought that was so cool. So I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. And the last book I read was The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. I had this on my 2022 anticipated releases, and this was a huge flop. Not her best work. Very boring. I didn't care for it at all. I gave it 3 stars. It just, I don't know. I found myself getting bored when reading it, but it takes place in a very spooky Paris apartment, obviously. This girl named Jess decides to move in with her half-brother, and so she tells him like, hey, I'm coming, and he doesn't seem very thrilled about it, but he's like, okay, fine. So she gets there and tries to call him saying, hey, I'm outside your apartment, and no answer. So she ends up picking the lock and getting in, and she finds his wallet and his phone and all of that, and that's when she discovers that he's missing. But because he's a 30-year-old adult, the police aren't really helping her, and she doesn't want to go to the police a lot. And it sounds like a really good premise, which is why I was excited for it, but I just did not care for it all that much, so I gave it 3 stars. So those are all the books that I read in February. Thank you so much for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe and turn on post notifications to be notified every time I upload, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!